When my son died, his wife inherited the house and $28 million. Then she kicked me out. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not welcome here anymore. Go die in the trash." But just a few days later, the lawyer smiled and asked, "Did you actually listen to the will?" What came next made my daughter-in-law faint on the spot. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching this. The mahogany casket gleamed under the gray Texas sky, heavy with rain that refused to fall. 30 people stood around my son's grave, their black clothes looking like a murder of crows scattered across the bright spring grass. I held Jeffrey's third-grade school photo in my weathered hands, its edges soft from years of being touched. My boy was gone, just 45 years old, and cancer still managed to take him. Zella, his wife, stood at the head of the casket, playing the grieving widow to perfection. Her black designer dress probably cost more than most folks here made in a month. Her perfectly manicured nails, painted blood red, rested on the polished wood as though she owned it. Owned everything. The minister's words about eternal rest were still echoing when she suddenly moved. Her heels clicked against the cemetery stones as she walked toward me, her face painted with just enough fake sympathy for the crowd to see. "Clyde," she whispered, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Her soft, manicured hand landed on my arm. "I hope you don't think you'll be staying in my house after this." The words hit me like ice water. Mourners shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear, but everyone did. I gripped Jeffrey's photo tighter, my jaw tensing. "This is my son's home," I said quietly. "Was your son's home?" she shot back, her voice dripping with that cruel, practiced sweetness. "Now it's mine." Jeffrey left everything to his loving wife. A soft gasp came from Mrs. Henderson, and Obie Smith stepped closer, his weathered face hard. These people had known Jeffrey since he was a boy. They'd watched him build his construction empire from nothing. "We haven't heard the will yet," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my chest was burning. Zella laughed. Actually laughed at my son's funeral. "What's there to hear? I'm his wife. Who else would he leave millions to?" Even the minister paused mid-sentence, clearly uncomfortable. People were staring, some looking away in embarrassment. This was supposed to be about Jeffrey, about honoring his life, and she was turning it into her own personal performance. The minister tried to continue, calling Jeffrey a pillar of the community. But Zella interrupted again, smiling at me with those cold, sharp blue eyes. "His real family," she said. That's when I understood this wasn't grief, and it wasn't just greed. This was strategy. She had planned this moment, chosen this public setting so I couldn't respond the way my blood demanded, so she could shape the story in front of witnesses. As the last shovel of dirt hit the casket, it felt like another piece of me breaking. But Zella's smirk, that smug, triumphant little smile, burned itself into my memory. She went back to her widow act, accepting condolences from people who'd known Jeffrey his whole life, while my grief was pushed aside like yesterday's newspaper. As the crowd drifted away toward their cars, I stayed behind. The gravediggers had finished their work, and Jeffrey's temporary marker stood crooked in the fresh dirt. I placed a single red rose on the mound, the same kind his mother had grown in our garden 30 years ago. Across the cemetery, Zella's laughter carried on the wind. She was holding court with a group of mourners, probably spinning some sad story about her burden. The wind caught my gray hair, and arthritis ached in my hands as I stared down at that school photo. Jeffrey at 8 years old, gap-toothed grin, cowlick that never behaved. When had that bright-eyed boy become the hollow-cheeked man I saw in that Houston hospital room just months ago? March 2023, MD Anderson Cancer Center. The smell of antiseptic clung to everything, but it couldn't cover the fear in that place. Jeffrey had lost nearly 40 pounds by then. His expensive suits hung loose on his frail frame. The experimental treatments weren't working, but he kept fighting, always fighting. "Dad," he'd said that day, gripping my hand with fingers like bird bones, "I want you to know I took care of you. Whatever happens, you're protected. I didn't fully understand then. I thought he meant life insurance. Maybe a savings account. Jeffrey had always been responsible, even as a kid, saving pennies in mason jars. But watching him struggle through those final months, I saw it. Not fear of dying, but fear of leaving things unfinished, leaving people unprotected. My memory drifted back 20 years earlier, Jeffrey at 28, standing in what would become his first office, a rented space above Murphy's hardware store, a folding table for a desk, dreams bigger than Texas. I'll never be poor like we were, Dad, he'd promised. He worked 16-hour days to turn that $5,000 loan into something real, built subdivisions across 3 counties, created jobs, gave families homes. He made his first $1 million by 35, $10 million by 40, and yet, even with all of that, he was still my boy. But the work never stopped. Jeffrey drove himself like a man possessed, chasing something I never fully understood, maybe trying to outrun the memory of government cheese and second-hand clothes, of watching his mother count pennies at the grocery store. The photograph trembled in my arthritic hands. I thought back to that last clear conversation, 3 days before the end. Jeffrey's voice had been barely more than a whisper, but every word carried urgency. She's not who I thought she was, Dad. Zella, I figured it out too late. Son, you're tired. The medicine, the will, I made sure you're protected. Promise me you'll fight if you need to. And I had promised, not even knowing what I was promising. I'd assumed it was the medication talking, or the pain twisting his thoughts. But now, standing over his grave, while Zella practically celebrated 50 yards away, those words felt like prophecy. Money hadn't saved him. All those years of building wealth, sacrificing his health, time, and peace of mind, and cancer still took him. The bitter irony burned worse than Zella's threats. But Jeffrey had been smart, smarter than I gave him credit for. While he was fighting for his life, he'd been fighting for mine too. I tucked the photograph into my jacket pocket, just as Zella's voice carried across the cemetery. Well, it's time to discuss practical matters, she called out. She was approaching with her little group of hand-picked witnesses, probably planning one last public humiliation. My grip tightened around that photo until the edges dug into my palm. Whatever Jeffrey had planned, whatever protection he'd promised me, I was going to need it, and soon. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking her designer shoes in mud. Good, let her struggle with something, even if it was just the wet grass. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward my old Ford pickup. Car doors slammed across the lot, engines starting. People were eager to escape the tension she'd created at the graveside, but she intercepted me halfway to my truck, her designer heels clicking against the wet pavement. Mrs. Henderson, Joe from First National Bank, and 3 others flanked her like a jury she'd hand-selected. Strategic positioning. I recognized it from my army days. James, you need to face reality, Zella said, planting herself squarely in my path. Her cold blue eyes locked on mine. Jeffrey left everything to me. The house, the business, the investments, all of it. Her confidence was absolute. This wasn't a bluff. This was a woman who knew something the rest of us didn't, and she was enjoying every second of the reveal. I kept my voice calm, like you do when talking to spooked livestock. We haven't heard the will yet, Zella. What's to hear? I'm his wife. Her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Did you really think he'd leave millions to someone who never contributed a dime to his success? The witnesses shifted uncomfortably. Joe cleared his throat and stared at his shoes. Mrs. Henderson clutched her purse tighter, wishing she were anywhere else, but none of them left. That was the point of this little performance. She was creating witnesses, establishing the narrative before anyone could challenge it. I know this is hard, Zella said, tilting her head with that fake sympathy, but you can't live in denial. Jeffrey loved you, but he was practical. He knew I'd need everything to maintain the life he built for us. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not just her words, but the timing, the public humiliation she was orchestrating while I was still standing in funeral. This woman studied pain the way others studied recipes. Everything all right here, James? Obadiah Smith's voice cut through the tension. At 68, Obi still had the frame of the farmer he once was, with hands strong enough to gentle a horse or stop a charging bull. 30 years of friendship had taught him how to read trouble, and Zella was trouble in a designer dress. Just discussing practical matters, Zella said, irritation flashing across her face before her mask slid back into place. Practical matters can wait, Obi said evenly, stepping slightly between us. Man deserves time to grieve his son. Of course he does, Zella replied, her smile as thin as razor wire. That's why I'm inviting everyone to the house for refreshments, a proper memorial gathering. This was news to me. Jeffrey would have wanted something simple, quiet, but Zella was rewriting his story in real time, turning herself into the generous hostess instead of the vulture picking over his bones. That sounds lovely, Mrs. Henderson said clearly, relieved to have something normal to focus on. Jeffrey would have appreciated that. Others murmured their agreement, eager to accept the invitation. Zella's smile widened as she watched them fall into line, solidifying her role as the rightful keeper of Jeffrey's memory. You'll come too, won't you, James? She asked, her tone soft but dangerous. It's important that family be there. Family. The word was an insult wrapped in courtesy. She was daring me to refuse, daring me to look bitter and small in front of neighbors who'd known me my entire life. Something's not right about this, Obi murmured, leaning close so only I could hear. His instincts were sharp, sharper than most people realized, but the others were already heading toward their cars, talking about what dishes they'd bring, how Jeffrey would have loved seeing everyone together. Zella had hijacked my son's memory, turning his funeral into her own coronation. I'll see you at the house, she said, triumph glittering in her icy blue eyes. After all, it's still your son's house for now. The emphasis on for now was deliberate, another small cruelty, delivered with surgical precision. She climbed into Jeffrey's Mercedes, her Mercedes now, and pulled away, leading the caravan of mourners to what had been my home for the past 3 years. I stood in the cemetery parking lot, rain soaking through my jacket, watching her taillights fade down the road. The funeral was over, but something else, something bigger was just beginning. Obi waited by his truck, engine idling, but didn't leave. You coming, old friend? I looked back at Jeffrey's grave one last time, then climbed into my pickup. Whatever Zella had planned for this so-called memorial gathering, I wasn't going to face it alone. The 15-minute drive to the house felt like heading into battle, and in a way it was. Cars pulled into the circular driveway, one after another, gravel crunching under tires. Zella's Mercedes was already parked proudly by the front steps. As if staking her claim, she emerged before most of us had even shut off our engines, suddenly full of energy, the kind that made my stomach turn. Please, everyone, come inside for refreshments, she called, her voice ringing across the driveway with theatrical projection. I've prepared a proper memorial gathering for Jeffrey. I climbed out of Obi's truck slowly, my joints aching after the long day. Something about all this felt wrong. We hadn't planned any memorial gathering. Jeffrey would have hated this spectacle. Since when did she plan a memorial? Obi muttered, falling into step beside me. The Victorian mansion looked exactly the same. White columns, wrap-around porch, the roses my late wife planted decades ago, but Zella stood on those steps like she owned every nail and floorboard. And maybe she did. Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow as I approached. James, dear, did you know about this gathering? No, ma'am, I said. This is news to me. Zella overheard us and turned that perfect, practiced smile our way. I wanted Jeffrey's friends to have a proper chance to remember him, she said smoothly. Surely you don't object to honoring your son's memory. The way she phrased it made any objection sound petty. Clever woman. Manipulative as a snake oil salesman, but clever. We filed into the house I'd called home for 3 years. The house where Jeffrey had been born, where his mother had died, where 3 generations of Wells men had lived and worked and loved. Now it belonged to a woman who'd known him less than 2 years. And that's when I saw the setup. Tables covered in white linens. Good china, not the everyday plates, but the wedding set that had been Jeffrey's mother's. Wine glasses glittered under the chandelier, expensive bottles already open and breathing. This wasn't thrown together in the hours since the funeral. She planned this, I muttered to Obi as we hung our coats in the hall. Before the funeral even ended, he agreed, his eyes scanning the room. Look at those flowers. Someone ordered those days ago. Zella swept through the rooms like a queen, directing mourners to the living room, offering drinks, talking about the wine selection like she was born to the role. Every move screamed possession, ownership, control. Please make yourselves comfortable, she said, gesturing to Jeffrey's favorite armchair, the leather recliner where he'd spent his last months when he was too weak to work. I'll bring everyone something to drink. Joe from the bank accepted a glass of wine that probably costs more than most people's weekly grocery bill. This is very thoughtful, Zella, he said. You prepared all this today. Jeffrey always said hospitality was important, she replied, pouring herself a generous glass. He would have wanted his friends to remember this day properly. Remember it properly. As if the funeral hadn't been enough. As if she needed to stamp her ownership onto Jeffrey's memory. 2. The doorbell rang. Slicing through the chatter, Zella's eyes lit up, almost gleeful, and she practically floated toward the door. That must be Mr. Thompson, she said, barely hiding her excitement. Now we can take care of the formal matters. Jasper Thompson entered, carrying his leather document case, expression calm but professional. His eyes found mine, and something passed between us. A look that made my pulse quicken. The real business was about to begin. 23. People found seats around the living room. The air felt as heavy as a tomb. Thompson positioned himself near the fireplace, removing documents from his case with slow, deliberate precision. Zella took the chair nearest him, smoothing her dress and adjusting her pearls like a queen preparing for her coronation. I chose the seat by the window, the place I'd sat countless evenings watching Jeffrey work at his laptop. I will now read the last will and testament of Jeffrey Michael Wells, Thompson said, his voice steady, formal. The room fell completely silent. Dated February 10th, 2025. Witnessed and notarized according to Texas state law. Zella's foot tapped against the rug, her fingers drumming the arm of the chair. She could barely contain herself. Thompson read through the formalities, declarations of sound mind, revocation of prior wills, appointment of executor. Mrs. Henderson shifted in her seat. Joe glanced at his watch. To my loyal employees at Wells Construction, Thompson read, I leave 1 month's additional salary to be distributed equally among all current staff. He continued, to my cousin Sarah in Houston, I leave my mother's jewelry collection. To the Willow Creek Public Library, I leave $50,000 for renovation of the children's section. Small gifts, charitable donations, standard will material, and Zella's impatience was growing by the minute. When does he get to the important parts? She whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. Thompson cleared his throat and turned to a fresh page. The room held its breath. To my beloved wife, Zella Marie Wells, he read, I leave the family home located at 847 Magnolia Street, along with its contents, and the sum of $28 million from my investment accounts. Zella shot too, her feet like she'd been launched from a cannon. I knew it. I knew Jeffrey took care of me. The guests' reactions were mixed, polite smiles from some, discomfort from others. Mrs. Henderson exchanged a glance with her husband. Even in grief, there were social rules, and Zella had just trampled them. I gripped the arms of my chair so hard, I felt the wood grain bite into my palms. 20-5 million, and the house. Jeffrey had been generous with his wife. What about me? I asked, my voice steady, though my throat was tight. Thompson's eyes found mine. Something flickered there, a look I couldn't quite place. To my father, James Samuel Wells, he read slowly, I leave all personal mementos, family photographs, and the tools from his workshop. The silence stretched so long, it felt like it might break. Tools and photographs, that was all. After helping build Jeffrey's empire, after 3 years of living under this roof, after a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Tools and photographs. Zella's smile could have powered the whole county. She turned to face the room like a queen, accepting congratulations from neighbors who'd known Jeffrey since he was in diapers. Jeffrey always said he'd take care of me, she declared, her voice full of triumph. He was such a thoughtful husband. Mrs. Henderson nodded politely. Well, dear, you're certainly set for life now. More than set, Zella laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. I'll never have to worry about anything again. I stayed, seated, watching her bask in attention, like a queen holding court, and in that moment, clarity hit me like a punch. This woman had never truly loved my son. To her, Jeffrey had been a golden ticket, a lifestyle, a fortune, an opportunity she couldn't resist. And my brilliant boy, he had figured it out too late, as neighbors offered their congratulations, and glasses clinked together. I noticed Thompson lingering near the edge of the room, packing up his documents, slowly, almost deliberately. Our eyes met, and he gave the smallest nod toward the kitchen. There is one additional clause, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the chatter, but it requires a private discussion. Zella was far too busy soaking up praise to notice, but I heard every word, and for the first time since this miserable day began, something like hope stirred in my chest. The formal reading had ended, but apparently, the real business was just beginning. Guests drifted toward the dining room, drawn by the elaborate feast Zella had so carefully staged. Crystal glasses caught the warm glow of the chandelier, polished silver gleamed against white linens. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reception. This was a performance she had planned well in advance. Zella raised her glass high, commanding Zellans like a conductor before an orchestra. To Jeffrey, she said brightly, who always took care of those he loved most. The irony hit me like a stone. She had just inherited $25 million and the house, while I had received nothing but tools and family photographs. Apparently Jeffrey's definition of those he loved most was more complicated than I'd realized. This wine is remarkable, Dr. Miller said, swirling the deep red in his glass. What vintage is it? 2012 Bordeaux, Zella answered smoothly. Jeffrey always said, life's too short for cheap wine. She floated through the room with polished grace, playing hostess like someone born into privilege. I wanted Jeffrey's friends to remember this day properly, she said. Mrs. Henderson accepted a glass, watching her closely. You managed to prepare all this today, after the funeral and everything. When you love someone, you find the strength, Zella said, smiling like a magazine cover model. Jeffrey would have wanted everyone to celebrate his life, not just mourn his death. Celebrate. An odd choice of word for what was supposed to be a memorial. But Zella seemed determined to turn Jeffrey's death into her personal victory lap. You know, she said, settling on the velvet sofa, I've always thought about modernizing this place. Maybe open up some walls, update the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. But it's such a historic home, dear. Been in the Wells family for 3 generations. Well, it's my family now, Zella replied with a tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. And honestly, all this dark wood and heavy furniture feels so dreary. I'm thinking light colors, contemporary style. Maybe knock out that wall between the kitchen and dining room. My grip tightened on the stem of my glass until my knuckles went white. My grandfather had built this house by hand in 1923, choosing every board, every piece of trim with care. Jeffrey had been born upstairs, taken his first steps on these floors, and now Zella wanted to gut it like a fixer-upper. Joe from the bank leaned forward, curious. Will you be staying here in Willow Creek, or thinking about relocating? Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Actually, I'm considering selling, maybe moving somewhere more exciting, Dallas, or even New York. The room went still. These people had watched Jeffrey grow up, watched him build his company here, create jobs, give back to the community. The thought of selling his family home to fund Zella's big city adventure landed like an insult. Jeffrey loved this house, I said quietly. He was born here. Zella turned toward me with a look of mock surprise, as if she had forgotten I was there. Jeffrey's gone, James, she said, her tone almost dismissive. It's time to live for the living, don't you think? And just like that, the mask dropped. No grieving widow. No gracious hostess. Just a woman hungry for cash and freedom. What's the point of keeping a museum, she continued, when I could turn this place into millions in cash? I could travel, buy a penthouse, actually live for the first time in years. Obi moved closer, his jaw tight, as if holding back words that might get us both thrown out. Mrs. Henderson stood, clearly uncomfortable. Well, I should be getting home early morning tomorrow. Others quickly followed, muttering polite excuses. Within minutes, the house had nearly emptied. People who had planned to stay all evening suddenly remembered urgent obligations. I stayed in my chair, watching with grim fascination. And one night, Zella had managed to alienate Jeffrey's entire circle of friends. They had come to honor him. Instead, they had been given a front row seat to his widow's greed. By 8 o'clock, only Obi and I remained. Zella stood in the dining room, scanning the half-empty wine glasses and abandoned plates with visible confusion. Well, I suppose people have busy lives, she said lightly, but for the first time all day, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Obi clapped my shoulder as he left. Call me if you need anything, old friend, and I mean anything. The front door closed with a heavy finality, leaving me alone with Zella in what had once been my home. She turned toward me, her confidence returning now that the audience was gone. Finally, she said, kicking off her heels with a sigh of relief. Now we can talk about your situation properly. Outside, the last car engines faded into silence, leaving only the steady tick of the grandfather clock. Zella moved through the kitchen, like she owned the place, humming softly, stacking dishes, as if she had been preparing for this moment all along. Well, that went better than I expected, Zella said, not even glancing my way as she scraped leftover appetizers into the garbage disposal. Her diamond earrings caught the kitchen light, glittering like tiny, cruel stars. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 3 years, watching her with grim fascination. She moved through the room like she owned it because legally, she now did opening cabinets with practiced familiarity. Finding the good dish soap without even looking. Zella, I said quietly, we need to discuss what happens next. She didn't turn around. The steady clink of dishes was the only reply for several moments before she spoke. What happens next? That's simple. When she finally faced me, the transformation was complete. The grieving widow mask had vanished. What stared back at me was all steel and calculation. Next, she said coldly, you pack your things and find somewhere else to live. The words hit me like body blows, even though I'd known they were coming. This house has been in my family for 4 generations, I said. Jeffrey was in your family, she snapped, whipping the dish towel with sharp finality. Now it's mine. Jeffrey left me everything, remember? My hands rested flat on the worn wooden table, steady despite the fire rising in my chest. 3 generations of Wells men had sat here, plotted their days, shared their meals, raised their children. Jeffrey told me you'd have trouble accepting reality, she said, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. He said you'd probably expect to live here forever, like some kind of charity case. My son never said that. Of course he didn't. She laughed, sharp as glass breaking. He was too polite to hurt your feelings. But he told me plenty. She began pacing the kitchen, her voice like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. He said you'd been depending on him too long, that it wasn't healthy for a man your age to rely on his son like that. Lies, every word. Poison-coated in confidence meant to sound believable to anyone who didn't know Jeffrey. Look, she said with mock sympathy. I get it. Change is hard for old people. But you need to understand something fundamental. This house is mine now. Legally, completely. The deed, the taxes, the mortgage, all mine. The deed might have Jeffrey's name, I said evenly. But this land belonged to my grandfather before Jeffrey was even born. Your grandfather didn't leave you anything, did he? She said, stopping to stare straight at me. Face it, James. You're a charity case who's outlived his usefulness. Her cruelty was breathtaking and she was enjoying every second of it. I want you out by tomorrow morning, she said, her voice rising. And you'll take only what you can carry. No furniture, no heirlooms, nothing that belongs to this house. I rose slowly, my arthritic knees making the movement measured and deliberate. Tomorrow morning, yes, I said calmly, and don't think about claiming anything in here belonged to your family. I have lawyers, James, good ones. They'll tie you up in court until you're dead. For the first time all day, I almost smiled. As you wish, Sela. The quiet acceptance threw her off balance. She'd been building toward a confrontation, rage tears, desperate begging. Instead, she got composure. We moved from the kitchen, into the dining room, past the mahogany table, where Jeffrey had done his homework as a boy, and into the living room, where generations of family portraits lined the mantel. I've been patient with you, Zella said, following close, her energy almost predatory. But my patience has limits. She moved through the room, touching each piece of furniture like she was staking a claim: the antique sofa, the carved end, tables, even the brass lamp that had belonged to Jeffrey's grandmother. This couch, these antiques, even that hideous family portrait, it's all mine now. Jeffrey chose every piece carefully, I said quietly, remembering how he'd spent months hunting down the perfect coffee table to match his mother's taste. Jeffrey's taste was as outdated as yours, she said dismissively. Her fingers slid over polished surfaces, like an appraiser preparing for an estate sale. I'm thinking Scandinavian modern. Clean lines, minimalism, no clutter. She was already erasing Jeffrey's memory, stripping this house of everything that tied it to its past. Here's what's going to happen, she said, planting herself in the center of the room. You'll take your clothes, your medication, and go. Nothing else is yours. And where do you expect me to go? I asked. She shrugged, casual, cruel. Not my problem. Senior center, trailer park. Maybe that old friend of yours, what's his name? Obi. Maybe he'll let you sleep in his barn. I'm 65 years old, Zella. I've lived in this county my entire life. Then you should have planned better for old age, she said, her smile sharp as a knife. Maybe, if you'd been a better father, Jeffrey would have left you something more than a box of rusty tools. That one landed hard. Jeffrey was a good son. He loved his family enough. She screamed, her voice shattering the air. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. I'm sick of hearing about Jeffrey and his perfect little family and this miserable old house. Her carefully styled hair had come loose, her makeup streaked with fury. He's gone, and you know what? I'm glad. The admission hit me like a blow to the chest, but instead of anger, I felt a strange, quiet peace. Get out of my sight, she hissed, venom dripping from every word. Go die in a gutter where you belong. I met her glare, calm and steady. As you wish, Zella. Her eyes widened in confusion. What? You're not going to argue? Beg? Make some pathetic speech about family loyalty? No. I allowed myself the smallest smile. I'll just collect my things. You're just giving up, she said, stunned. I'm respecting your wishes, I said simply. You are, after all, the legal owner of this house. Her face twisted with frustration, like a predator robbed of its fight. I'll need an hour to pack my essentials, I said, starting toward the stairs. 2 suitcases, no more. That seems fair. She stayed in the living room, watching me go, suspicion clouding her features. Crushing someone only felt satisfying if they fought back, and I hadn't given her the satisfaction. I climbed the stairs slowly, her gaze heavy on my back. At the top, I turned and asked, "Will you be staying up to supervise?" "I'll be right here," she said, arms crossed. "Don't try anything clever." I chuckled, genuinely amused. At my age, what could I possibly try? Her heels clicked against the hardwood as I disappeared down the hall. She'd won, or so she thought, but my calmness unsettled her. Good. Let her stew in it. By dawn, I was gone. My old Ford pickup sat low under the weight of 2 battered suitcases, all that remained of 43 years in the Wells house. As the sun crept over the Texas horizon, turning the sky the color of fresh peaches, I pulled into a roadside inn off Route 35. The motel room was small, the air stale with disinfectant and old cigarettes. I sat on the rough polyester bedspread, staring at the single open suitcase. 3 changes of clothes, my medication, Jeffrey's 3rd grade school photo, and my father's pocket watch. 65 years of living reduced to this. 18-wheelers roared past, shaking the thin walls. People were starting their day, heading to work, running errands, while mine had been turned inside out in less than 24 hours. I looked at Jeffrey's photograph. I hope you knew this day might come, son. The cheap coffee maker sputtered to life. I sat at the tiny table, steam curling from my cup as I replayed yesterday's will, reading in my mind. Something hadn't sat right. The way attorney Jasper Thompson mentioned that additional clause, the look he gave me, almost like a warning. Jeffrey had been the smartest man I ever knew, built an empire from nothing, outmaneuvered competitors twice his size. Was it really possible he'd leave me at Zella's mercy, knowing how little he trusted her at the end? I found Thompson's card in my wallet and dialed. "Thompson Legal Services," came the voice. "Jasper, it's James Wells. We need to talk." His tone shifted instantly. "James, where are you? I heard Zella had you thrown out." "She did, last night. Told me to die in a gutter while she takes my son's house." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You mentioned an additional clause yesterday. I think it's time you explained it." Silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then Jasper's voice came back, this time with a note of satisfaction. "Yes, it's time. Can you be here by 10 o'clock? I'm at the roadside inn on Route 35. I'll leave now." "Good. And James, bring everything she said to you last night. Every word, every insult. Write it down if you have to. What difference does that make?" Because Jeffrey anticipated this exact situation. His tone was certain now, almost triumphant. "Your son was even smarter than you knew." For the first time in weeks, hope stirred in my chest at exactly 10 o'clock. I parked outside Thompson's office, a familiar brick building in downtown Willow Creek. The streets were quiet, flags hanging limp in the still morning air. Inside, Jasper greeted me with a firm handshake, his expression unusually bright. "You seem almost pleased," I said. "James," he said, spinning the combination on his office safe, "did you really listen to every word of the will yesterday?" "I heard what everyone else heard. Zella got everything. I got a box of tools. That's what they think. He pulled a thick manila folder from the safe and laid it on the desk with care. But Jeffrey was far more clever than she realized. My pulse quickened as he spread the pages before me. Look here, Section 15B. I leaned forward, squinting at the fine print. My throat tightened as I read aloud. The house and monetary assets transferred to my wife, Zella Marie Wells, on the condition that she provides proper care and dignified housing for my father, James Samuel Wells, until his natural death. The room went utterly still, except for the ticking of the desk clock. Keep reading, Jasper said quietly. Should this condition be violated through eviction, verbal abuse, or failure to provide respectful treatment, the entire inheritance shall immediately revert to the Jeffrey Wells Cancer Research Foundation. My hands shook. Jasper, she threw me out. She told me to die in a gutter. I know she did. He smiled, almost grimly, because Jeffrey asked me to keep an eye on her. He knew what kind of woman he'd married, and he made sure you'd be protected even after he was gone. For the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Zella thought she'd won. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Thompson pulled another document from his briefcase, a legal definition sheet. The will defines proper care as dignified housing, respectful treatment, and family consideration, he explained. Zella violated all three conditions within 36 hours. Tears burned behind my eyes, grief, relief, and pride in my son, all tangled together. Jeffrey knew. He knew she'd do this. Your son loved you more than his own comfort, James, Thompson said gently. His exact words were, Dad deserves better than I can give him while I'm fighting this cancer, but I can make sure he's taken care of after I'm gone. It hit me like a punch to the chest, while he was fighting for his own life. Jeffrey had been fighting for mine too, building legal protection around me like a fortress. What happens now? I asked, wiping my eyes with the same handkerchief I'd carried for 40 years. Now, Thompson said, already stamping documents with his notary seal, we inform Mrs. Wells that the inheritance is null and void. When do we tell her? This afternoon. Are you ready to face her again? I squared my shoulders, feeling strength surge back into me. More ready than I've been since this nightmare started. By 3 o'clock, we were pulling into the circular drive of the Wells house. My house, legal documents organized neatly in the back seat. Thompson rang the bell. Zella's footsteps echoed inside, sharp against the hardwood. I'm not expecting anyone, she called. The door opened, and the moment she saw me standing there, fury twisted her face. I told you never to come back here. Zella, we brought you something interesting, I said evenly. Thompson stepped forward, his tone all business. Mrs. Wells, there are aspects of your husband's will that you seem to have overlooked. The will was read yesterday. Everything's settled. You're trespassing. Actually, ma'am, I suggest you read the full version before making that claim. He handed her the complete document, embossed seals, notarized signatures, all in order. This looks the same as yesterday, she said, scanning the first pages. Keep reading, Thompson instructed. Page 3, Section 15B. I watched her face as confusion turned to disbelief, then to panic. This is fake, she shrieked. You forged this. Ma'am, Thompson said calmly. The original is in my office safe, witnessed and notarized under Texas state law. Her hands trembled as she read the protection clause aloud. Proper care and dignified housing for my father, James Samuel Wells. Her voice faltered. You violated that condition when you evicted him and told him to die on a trash heap, Thompson said, his words cutting through the silence. This can't be legal, she cried. It was just words. I didn't mean it. Intent is irrelevant, Thompson replied. Verbal abuse is grounds for forfeiture. The entire estate now reverts to the Jeffrey Wells Cancer Research Foundation. Zella's knees buckled slightly as she sank into a chair, staring at the floor. Yesterday you had everything, I said quietly. Today you have exactly what you gave me. Nothing. The power dynamic had flipped completely. Thompson placed the transfer documents on the coffee table. As of Friday, the foundation assumes full legal ownership. Mr. Wells will remain as a permanent resident. I sat back in Jeffrey's old recliner, the same one where he'd spent his last months. You can stay too, Zella, I said. But under my rules. Basic human decency. Respect. No more threats. Her voice was small now. What if I apologize? Take it all back. It's too late, Thompson said firmly. The transfer is irreversible. Zella looked at me, her face pale. I've lost everything I planned for. No, I corrected softly. You lost everything you tried to steal. When Thompson left, I remained in the living room. Zella sat motionless, staring at the wall. For the first time since Jeffrey's death, we were equals to people under the same roof, both forced to face a future neither of us had wanted. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry is a start, I said, but respect is what matters, going forward. The grandfather clock chimed for afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows my late wife had chosen, illuminating the family portraits that would remain on these walls long after Zella and I were gone. Jeffrey's final gift wasn't just justice, it was peace. And some victories, I thought, are worth waiting for.